The Young and the Restless spoilers Wednesday full episodes July 23, 2025. There was something deeply unsettling about the way silence fell in the halls of the French estate where the Genoa city elite had gathered, a silence too calculated, too still, as if danger itself had paused to listen. Nick Newman had never been a man of subtlety, and now, backed into a corner with a murder charge looming like a guillotine over his head, he was anything but quiet. He raged against the accusations, against the manipulation, against the terrifying reality that someone had set him up with surgical precision. The discovery of the bloody knife in his private compartment wasn't a mistake, it was planted, and he knew it. But shouting the truth into a void of silence and suspicion did little to free him. If anything, it made things worse. Carter, the ever-watchful enforcer whose loyalty lay shrouded in shadow, continued to circle like a warden without mercy, and now Nick's survival depended on more than just innocence, it depended on escape. And Sharon, fierce and loyal, refused to let him face the storm alone. She had chosen to remain by his side when the walls began to close in, and now they were both entangled in a web far more deadly than they ever imagined. What had started as a high-society excursion had devolved into a labyrinth of lies, and someone wearing gloves, perhaps hiding behind Carter's cold professionalism or Cain's sudden hero complex, was still out there, hunting, watching, waiting. Damien was already gone. But the killer wasn't finished. And Nick and Sharon were next. The estate had become a prison disguised in opulence. Behind each locked door was a secret, and beyond every manicured hedge, a threat. Nick had begun to suspect that their captivity wasn't just about keeping him close, it was about ensuring he never spoke, never proved his innocence, never saw justice. Sharon, usually a voice of calm and reason, had become increasingly agitated. She sensed the shift in the air, the tightening grip of a plan far bigger than they initially thought. And then came the whispers that a murderer was lurking within the maze that adorned the edge of the estate's private grounds. A killer. Still here. Still watching. Someone who knew exactly how to silence, how to erase, how to make death look like an accident or a jealous rage. Nick and Sharon began planning their escape not out of defiance, but out of survival. But they weren't the only ones watching the game change in real time. Victor Newman, now more convinced than ever that his family was under targeted assault, had begun leveraging every ounce of his power to dismantle the mystery. While Nick was his immediate concern, Victor understood that these attacks weren't random. They were methodical. And he needed to get ahead of it before the next body dropped. Enter Audra Charles. Beautiful, intelligent, ambitious, and never afraid to play dirty. Victor knew exactly who she was, and more importantly, what she wanted. Power. Access. A future among the elite. So he offered her a deal as cold as it was cunning. Help him gain leverage over Kyle Abbott by seducing him, isolating him, weakening him, and in return, he would fund her next business venture, no questions asked, no strings visible. Audra didn't hesitate. Kyle, emotionally tangled from past regrets and vulnerable from recent romantic setbacks, had agreed to travel to France with Audra, neither of them bringing their significant others, both pretending this was a professional trip. But the chemistry was real, and Audra knew exactly how to use it. Kyle didn't yet realize he was the center of a chessboard where every piece moved with Victor's hand. And Victor? He wasn't doing it for business. He was doing it for revenge. For Nikki. For Nick. For the family that was being torn apart by forces both internal and external. Kyle was a tool. Audra was the knife. But back in the estate's guest wing, Nikki Newman had reached her breaking point. Nearly murdered in the hallway. Saved, perhaps, by Cain Ashby, though even that was in dispute. Whatever gratitude she might have felt had dissolved quickly in the heat of suspicion. She no longer believed in Cain's innocence. Not in the murder. Not in the cover-up. Not even in the bizarre claim that he had protected her from a gloved killer. Nikki had seen too many games, too many betrayals, and Cain reeked of desperation. He wasn't a hero. He was a man trying to clean his fingerprints off a crime scene. Now, every time she looked at him, her stomach turned. She wanted nothing more to do with him or his calculated morality. The idea that he was still welcome at Chancellor enraged her, and she made her position known to anyone who would listen: Victor, Amanda, even Billy. No more, she told them. No more pretending Cain has anything to offer this family except chaos. Meanwhile, Billy and Sally pressed forward with their quiet investigation. The glimpse of security footage they'd uncovered was enough to create questions but not enough to create answers. They knew someone had been in Damien's compartment before the murder. They knew Carter had accessed the server. And they knew Nick had no motive except what had been manufactured for him. But unless they could find something solid, a name, a timestamp, a second weapon, Nick's fate would remain in the hands of a justice system eager to close a high-profile case. And Sally, watching the man she once cared about suffer so deeply, couldn't let that happen. Her alliance with Billy, strange though it was, had become her anchor in a sea of madness. Together, they followed the money, the communications, the guest logs. And what they found next shook them both. A deleted email, recovered from the server's hidden backup, linking Carter not to Cain, but to a third party, an unknown account traced to a shell company operating out of Monaco. Someone else was paying Carter. Someone neither Newman nor Abbott. A ghost with no name. The real mastermind? It changed everything. If Carter wasn't acting solely on Cain's orders, if he was playing double agent, then Cain may have been telling the truth, at least partially. But that didn't mean he wasn't dangerous. It only meant he was being used, just like everyone else. The killer wasn't done. The maze was still hiding secrets. Nick and Sharon were still in danger. And as the production crew for the GC Fantasy Island project moved toward the final day of filming, no one knew whether they were recording a celebration or setting the stage for another corpse. By the time night fell, Nick and Sharon had escaped the inner wing of the villa, using a path only Sharon remembered from her earlier visit. But as they emerged near the base of the maze, they heard a sound, not footsteps, not voices, but the low hum of a blade slicing air. They froze. In the distance, a figure moved. Not Carter. Not Cain. Taller. Slower. Deliberate. Nick pushed Sharon behind a wall of hedges and stepped into the moonlight, blood still staining his side from the earlier attack. "Come on," he whispered, not to her, to the killer. "Let's end this." Whether he would survive the night was anyone's guess. But one thing was certain, the truth would no longer stay buried. The darkness surrounding Genoa City had followed them to France, but now, in the stillness of the maze, it had found its reckoning. Let me know if you'd like the next part to focus on the identity of the killer, the third party behind Carter, or a shocking twist involving Phyllis, Amanda, or Kyle. We can continue weaving this into a full-scale thriller. The heat in the French air was no longer just from the sun or the clamor of production lighting for the GC Fantasy Island project. It radiated from a deeper, darker tension that refused to loosen its grip on the elite visitors from Genoa City. And nowhere was that tension more precariously coiled than between Audra Charles and Kyle Abbott. What had started as a calculated move, a kiss designed to satisfy an arrangement made in whispers between Victor Newman and the ever-ambitious Audra, had now evolved into something far murkier. That kiss had been soft but sharp, a blend of old attraction and new agendas, and in the immediate aftermath, it had seemed as though something real might be blooming. Kyle had been distant for too long, burdened by the weight of betrayal, responsibility, and identity, and Audra, cunning yet oddly sincere, had stepped into that vacuum. But sincerity was not a luxury she could afford for long. Because Victor was watching. And Victor did not care about chemistry or longing or second thoughts. He cared about results. And he had made his position painfully clear: Audra would follow through with her promise, or she would lose everything: her funding, her position, her future. He had elevated her once before, and now he would not hesitate to cast her aside again. Audra felt the pressure clawing at her every step. She replayed the scene with Kyle over and over again in her mind, wondering if the softness she saw in his eyes had been genuine or just reflex. Kyle, for his part, seemed distant the morning after, less flirtatious, more contemplative. There was a tension in the air between them, the kind that simmers between two people who have crossed a line they can't uncross. Audra knew she needed to push further, to fulfill her end of the bargain, to draw Kyle in fully and leave him vulnerable. But she also sensed something dangerous in what they were becoming, not just tools for Victor's games, but potential casualties. And yet, hesitation was a luxury she couldn't afford. Victor had already sent his reminder, a brief message with no warmth, just expectation, you know what needs to be done. Do not disappoint me again. Elsewhere on the estate, Nikki Newman was unraveling. The fear that had taken root in her heart after her near-death encounter had not left. It had spread. It gnawed at her thoughts during the day, haunted her dreams at night. The estate that once felt like a romantic escape now felt like a mausoleum. Cain's continued presence, once tolerable, now felt suffocating. She had no patience left for his cryptic glances, his overeager attempts to play hero, or his constant insinuations that he was misunderstood. She saw through it all now, the manipulation, the selective truths, the careful positioning of himself as both victim and savior. She didn't believe he had saved her from the attacker. She believed he had been there, yes, but too late to help and far too willing to exploit the story afterward. Nikki was done pretending. She didn't care about diplomacy or damage control. All she wanted was to go home. Because home was where she was needed now more than ever. The news of Cole Howard's death had hit Nikki harder than she allowed herself to admit. His passing wasn't just a loss, it was a fracture in the foundation of her family. Victoria was grieving, shattered in ways only a mother could understand. Claire, the granddaughter Nikki had only recently begun to embrace, was caught in the aftermath, confused, unmoored, and needing guidance. Nikki should have been there. Instead, she was trapped in a foreign land, dancing around lies, murders, and power plays while the people she loved most tried to piece their lives back together without her. The guilt consumed her. And it fueled her resolve. She confronted Cain with the full force of that resolve, sharp, unrelenting, and without diplomacy. She warned him, clearly, that whatever goodwill he thought he had, it was gone. She would not protect him. She would not vouch for him. And when she left this place, she would make sure others saw him for what he truly was. But did that change anything between them? No. Not yet. Because Cain was still protected by ambiguity, by the convenient fog that made it impossible to fully prove his role in the events surrounding Damien's death. And until someone brought irrefutable proof to light, he remained a dangerous variable. And Nikki wasn't the only one losing patience. Victor had grown tired of the subtlety. He had played the long game long enough. Nick's situation remained unresolved, Carter was still unaccounted for, and Sharon's well-being was under constant threat. The killer hadn't been caught. The maze still whispered with secrets. Victor had moved mountains to fund this project, to keep his family close, to reassert his control. And now, it was crumbling around him. The offer he made to Audra had been strategic, yes, but it was also laced with vengeance. He wanted Kyle weakened, distracted, so Victor could expose who was truly loyal and who was playing both sides. If Audra failed him, she would be cut off. No second chances. No apologies. Her future, like her past, would be rewritten without her. Back in the guest suite, Audra sat alone, staring at the vineyard beyond the terrace. She could feel everything slipping. The kiss had been the easy part. But Kyle, now withdrawn and curious, had started asking questions, not just about her, but about what Victor wanted. About why she had truly come to France. If he dug too deep, if he uncovered her arrangement with Victor, then the entire game would collapse. She had tried to seduce him into distraction, but Kyle wasn't as naive as she had hoped. And now she was cornered: fulfill Victor's demand and risk losing Kyle's trust completely, or pull away and watch her entire career go up in flames. For the first time in a long time, Audra didn't know what to do. And so the tension continued to simmer, wrapping itself around every corner of the estate, tightening like a noose. The killer still hadn't been caught. Nick was still trying to clear his name. Sharon was still his lifeline. Billy and Sally were on the verge of exposing a deeper conspiracy involving Carter. Amanda remained silent, perhaps complicit. And Victor? He stood at the center of it all, orchestrating what he could, destroying what he must, and protecting his family with the only weapon he had left: absolute control. But control, as always in Genoa City, was an illusion. And as the final day of the production neared, and as Nikki made arrangements to leave the cursed estate behind, she felt a chill on her neck that told her the danger wasn't over. It had simply moved closer. Would you like to continue the next part with Victor confronting Audra directly, Carter being found or killed, or Claire arriving in France and becoming the next target? Let me know your direction and I'll keep the story flowing.